Good morning, NAIFA. I hope everyone is doing well during these unprecedented times. My name is Corrado Gugliotta, NAIFA New Jersey president. I am super excited for today's event. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining our first ever virtual and multi-state triple play event. We are pleased to join forces with NAIFA Pennsylvania, NAIFA Delaware, and NAIFA New York in bringing you today's program. A warm welcome to both our members and also our non-members. Our other important partners today are our sponsors. You wouldn't have access to today's wonderful CE opportunity without Jackson National as our platinum sponsor, and we thank Jackson National for all of their support to NAIFA. We also extend our gratitude towards our gold event sponsors, Primary Financial, Tri-State Brokerage Solutions, and Principal. With all that said, as part of our NAIFA tradition, I ask if you're able to please stand for our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd now like to turn it over to our VP of Development and Education, Danny Kaplan. Danny?
Corrado, thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and privilege to welcome you to NAIFA New Jersey Virtual Triple CE Day. An event like this does not happen by accident. Numerous hours of teamwork enable us to provide you with an unprecedented educational program. There are so many to thank. In advance, please accept my apologies if I inadvertently forgot to acknowledge anyone. We again would like to thank our platinum sponsor, Jackson National, Rob Kinski and Adam Shevsky, our esteemed colleagues who are responsible for providing the 24 CE credits. Jackson has long been a tremendous partner with NAIFA, and we thank them for their continued support. Next, we would like to thank our gold sponsors in the order of presentation. Primary Financial sponsoring Van Miller's presentation, Success Before, During, and After the Pandemic, How to Increase Your Appointments Dramatically. Principal sponsoring Joe Jordan's presentation, Prospering in a Post-COVID World, and Tri-State Brokerage Solution sponsoring Tom Hegner's presentation, Handling Objections and Asking Powerful Questions. Thank you again to our gold sponsors, and an additional thank you to our sponsors who have contributed to the website and supporting NAIFA. We are living in some very unprecedented times: political unrest, US political elections, COVID-19. But one thing never changes, that is you. As advocates, if not for you or somebody like you, who would be there to help the individuals and businesses that place their trust and confidence in us? Remember, doctors prolong life. You, ladies and gentlemen, help prolong life with dignity. Advocacy enables us to be confrontational without being adversarial. I urge you to stay true to your career. We must cross the line. The work you do has impact above and beyond what is seen on the surface. If not for us or somebody like us, who would help in times of need? We have a tremendous event planned for today. 3 of the top speakers in our industry coming together in one platform, an unprecedented event. Afterwards, we will have an open question and discussion panel. We would like to thank our keynote speakers, Van Miller, Joe Jordan, and Tom Hegner, as these gentlemen have been instrumental and have supported NAIFA in unprecedented ways. We are better and stronger as a cohesive unit. Together, NAIFA can and will prevail. Failure is not an option. One NAIFA, one voice. Last but not least, I would like to extend a humble thank you to to our committee responsible for today's presentation. Without the hard work and dedication, today is just an aberration. Again, on behalf of NAIFA New Jersey, God bless. I hope you and your families are safe and well. Enjoy the presentation. Now I would like to turn the presentation over to Diane Boyle, NAIFA's Senior Vice President of Government Relations.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of the NAIFA New Jersey meeting. We're going to talk a little bit about post-election analysis, and it's still going on, so there's lots to talk about. Let's go to the next slide. So we started with about 24 presidential candidates. It's taken us about 2 years. Close to $14 billion have been spent, and we're actually close to having some answers. So if you look at the presidential election, you need 270 electoral college votes in order to claim victory. Biden has 290, Trump has 217, and you're still waiting for 2 states, Georgia and North Carolina, to be called, and they hold 31 votes. In the Senate, you need 51 to claim a majority. We have currently 48 Democrats, 50 Republican, and we have 2 races in Georgia that have yet to be called. In the House, you need 218 in order to have a majority. The Democrats currently have 220, and the Republicans have 208. That's a much narrower margin than what was held in this current Congress. So the next Congress is going to be a lot tighter. The Senate is expected to hold, the Republicans are expected to hold that Senate majority, which would mean that Mitch McConnell would remain the Senate majority leader. The minority leader would still be Chuck Schumer. And for relationship-wise in the Senate, you're looking at both of these gentlemen had really close relationships with former Senator and Vice President Joe Biden. So I think we're going to see the relationships between these guys work a lot better than what some people are anticipating. I think there is some room for negotiation and compromise on policy. Look at the next slide. So in the Senate, we're looking at how many seats actually flipped. And so that means a Democrat taking what has traditionally been considered a Republican seat or vice versa. So the Democrats in the Senate picked up 2, one in Arizona, one in Colorado. The Republicans picked up 1 in Alabama. We're going to talk on the next slide a little bit about stuff specific to NAIFA. So we were watching really closely 11 Senate toss-up races. And so what this means is the pollsters take a look at the information and say, we don't really know. It doesn't really lean too far right. It doesn't lean too far left. So it's a toss-up as to who's going to win. And the reason we focused on these 11 seats, or there are 11 races, is because they held seats on committees that have jurisdiction over our issues. So Senate Finance, Senate Banking, the Health Committee, the Aging Committee. And so if any of those toss-up races were lost, then we know that we would automatically lose a seat or have to fill another seat on these committees. So there were 3 losses, actually 2 losses, and Senator Roberts retired. So that means that we knew that there are going to be 3 new positions on key committees. There were 6 that were held and 2 that are still pending. So the 2 Georgia Senate races that I mentioned earlier, those sit on committees of jurisdiction for NAIFA Banking and the Health Committee. So we're watching those races closely because it would change not only the dynamic or the numbers in the Senate, but it would also change the committee structures that has jurisdiction over some of our issues. The next slide. So as I mentioned, the House numbers became much narrower. So Speaker Pelosi's job just got a lot harder. Trying to find consensus within her own party is going to become more difficult. Actually, winning her job back is going to be difficult. She has to have 218 votes in order to be elected as Speaker. And as you saw, there are 220 members in her own party, so she can only afford to really annoy 2 of her own people in order to earn her seat back. There's talk about some competition for that job, but there's no one with the experience of the Speaker, so I don't think that that's going to turn out to amount to much, but she's going to have to work pretty hard to keep her seat. and to work with the House structure in the 117th Congress, just to get any policy initiatives over the finish line. So we'll talk about in a minute some of the House seats that were lost, but it was primarily the moderate Democrats that lost those seats to Republican challengers. And what I would suggest is we need to look really closely at that Problem Solvers Caucus. What the Problem Solvers Caucus is a caucus within the House that's divided equally among Republican and Democrat members that say we're going to work together. And if they reach consensus on a policy initiative within that caucus over a certain threshold, everyone in the caucus agrees that they're going to support it. And so I think they're going to be really instrumental in the next Congress on how we deal with policy. Let's take a look at the next slide, please. So in the House, when we talk about the flips were more dramatic in the House, obviously, than in the Senate, simply because the numbers are larger. But you're looking, Republicans actually picked up 10 seats from traditionally held Democratic seats. What I think is pretty interesting too here is that 8 out of the 10 seats that were filled by females. And I think on NAIFA's issues, that's going to be really important because you're going to have an audience, especially, and we were talking yesterday about long-term care specifically in policy. And with the large majority of caregivers that are traditionally female, I think it changed sort of the reception of our messaging to members when you have a larger component of females in the House. On the Democratic side, there were 3 flips, and all of those were from males to females. And again, they were taken from traditional Republican seats that the Democrats were able to pick up. Look at the next slide, please. So in the House, very much like the Senate, there were certain, we like to say that we watch all of the races, but we watch some of them with a little more intensity. And there were 36 House races that we were watching, and again, because of the committee of jurisdiction. There were 11 that were either lost or given up because of retirement. 24 were held, and there's still 1 pending that we're watching and waiting for that election to be called. Then the next slide, please. So Congressional Women, I talked about that a little bit, that I do see the influx of more women into the House, although it's still only 25% of the Congress. It's the largest majority or largest numbers that we've seen for women in a long time. So is the historic pickup is going to change the dynamics of the House. There will be at least 135, and we're still waiting for some races to be called, so that number could become even greater. Next slide. So the timeline, we had the election, then the Senate convened for their lame duck session. They started on November 9th. The House comes back November 16th. They'll start doing new member orientation. They'll figure out what they need to do to wrap up the 116th Congress. The 116th Congress actually ends on January 3rd, and the 117th Congress is sworn in and begins. Then you'll see on January 6th is when the joint session of Congress meets to count the electoral votes for the presidency. And the next slide, please. So the leadership elections need to figure out who's going to take charge, and we're still have some elections that are outstanding, but I think we know where we stand, that the House will be controlled by the Democratic caucus, and in the Senate, it will most likely remain with the Republicans. So the Democrats will start having their leadership elections the week of November 18th. We expect that it's going to be Speaker Pelosi again. Steny Hoyer has announced that he's still going to run for majority leader. James Clyburn is a more lip, and so we think that the leadership there will remain the same. The Senate, and we'll talk about that in a minute, they have announced their leadership, so we'll look at who they have in place. On the House, on the Republican in the House, they're looking to have their elections next week as well. we expect it largely to remain the same, that you're going to see Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, and Cheney to maintain their leadership positions. And then the Senate Republicans don't expect any changes there, but they actually have not announced the date for their elections. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the Democratic leadership, we talked about that, that they had already announced who they have. And as I said, it's largely the same cast of crew. For our New Jersey folks, I want to point out that the vice chair of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee is your very own Cory Booker. So that's going to be important for you. I also bolded Senator Manchin, and I think he's going to be key to watch in that leadership role. And he shares the same title, if you will, with Cory Booker. And he's very moderate from West Virginia, and is going to push the leadership into a communication strategy of being more centrist. And so it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. So watch that as we move forward as well. Let's look at the next slide, please. So then you get down to committee leadership. And so we are going to see some changes, particularly in the Senate. If you look at Senate banking, Democratic leader will be Sherrod Brown. Now, if somehow Georgia flips and the two senators are two elected senators or from the Democratic Party, you'll see Sherrod Brown actually become the chairman. If not, that's why we have him just listed as leader, so you can flip who will chair the committee that way. Mike Crapo is going to a different committee. We'll talk about that. He's going to move to finance, so that would make Pat Toomey the chairman for Senate banking. On the Senate finance, you're looking at Ron Wyden still holding his ranking position. Chuck Grassley, who currently chairs the Finance Committee, is going to go back to Judiciary. He's basically been term limited out of serving as chair for the Senate Finance Committee. So we'll see Mike Crapo step up into that position, or possibly John Cornyn if Mike Crapo goes somewhere else. But right now, the thought is that he's going to stay and become the Senate Finance Chairman. Senate Health Committee, which is the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension, which has a number of our issues there. Patty Murray will retain her position as the Democratic leader. Richard Burr will step up. Lamar Alexander retired and become the chair. House Financial Services Committee, Maxine Waters will maintain her position as chair. Patrick McHenry would be ranking. Ways and Means, same thing. Richie Neal, chairman. Kevin Brady would maintain his position as ranking. And in the House Education and Labor Committee, you're going to see Representative Scott and Congresswoman Virginia Fox as the leaders in those committees. So the next slide. So in the lame duck, we're looking at making sure that we solidify those leadership elections, get that in place. We're going to look at potentially a COVID relief package. And then let's not forget that government funding runs out on December 11th. So the Congress has to come together and figure out how to fund the government beyond December 11th before they can go home. On the next slide. We also have heard from President-elect Biden that his priorities would be COVID-19, economic recovery, racial equality, and climate change. And I think there are opportunities for us to engage in conversation with what our industry does and the products that you provide and the service that you provide to consumers. And in the top three, certainly the COVID relief, we're seeing where our industry has been instrumental there in actually providing some of that relief. When you look at economic recovery, that's what our industry is designed to do. And I think we're going to have some obstacles, and I'll talk about that a little bit further in the presentation. But we definitely need to make sure that we're part of that economic recovery. And even on racial equality, the way that our products are positioned in what communities we're serving can be part of those conversations. And I think we'll see that in the upcoming Congress. Let's go to the next slide. So there are some roadblocks to what the president wants to do. There's filibuster in the Senate. As I mentioned, the inter-party division is going to be tough. And the court challenges, should there be any, the courts have stalled some of the issues that were brought about with the Trump administration. And I don't think that there's going to be a lot of support for executive action with the Biden administration either. So those are sort of, you think you have the presidency, it's smooth sailing, I have an agenda, this is what we're going to run with. And the reality is it's a little more complicated than that. And I don't think that it's a set or a done deal. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we'll talk about at least what some of the priorities are and see how it aligns with where we are. We're largely going to see in the financial regulation arena that the Biden administration will return to sort of the Obama era approach. We're looking at bringing back sort of the Dodd-Frank regulations, increased consumer financial protection enforcement, and some changes to corporate taxes and taxes on high-income individuals. So next slide. So we're going to do a couple of different scenarios here, and what I've done is we're going to look if the Senate maintains the Republican majority, and we'll take a look and see what happens if the Senate flips to being controlled by the Democrats. And the shift there, because it's so narrow, you think, well, it really doesn't make that much of a difference, and that's true. You're going to have to find common ground in order to get policy passed. But what it does is it changes who controls what lands on the floor. And so that's important. So let's look here. We're talking on the political impacts. The Democratic president is going to look at major regulatory reforms through executive action. And then on the policy side, we're looking at increased regulation from the Dodd-Frank era. We're going to see more financial actors required to act as fiduciary. So that fiduciary conversation that we've been having for years, sadly, is going to continue. Let's look at the next slide and see if we change and the Senate picks up the 2 Democratic seats, which would make it a 50-50 split, and the vice president then breaks the tie. Same thing, although now you're looking at major reform for the financial industry. There's an opportunity if you pick up the Senate, and so you have sort of a trifecta across the administration, the House, and the Senate, that is this a time for us to just do a major recall? And so that's really concerning. Let's take a look at the next slide. Let's look at tax reform a little bit. And what is the likelihood? And again, we have the Republican-controlled Senate versus the Democrat-controlled Senate here. And it really isn't that different. You're going to see an increase, or at least a discussion of the increase of a corporate tax rate. And you just simply move from likely to very likely if the Dems pick up the 2 seats. If the Republican holds the 2 seats in Georgia, it's still likely that we're going to have those conversations. It's still going to be a top one. An institution of a wealth tax will certainly come up in conversation. Still possible with the Republican-held Senate, but it's going to be very likely if the Democrats pick up those 2 seats. Same is true with the financial transaction tax. And I know those of you in New Jersey are very familiar with what New Jersey did. And so we'll have those conversations on a federal level if the Democrats pick up those 2 seats in Georgia. Take a look at the next slide. So on healthcare, you're looking at expanding health insurance options and access, and then you're also looking at the cost of healthcare as being a priority for the Biden administration. Take a look at the next slide. So same scenario here, we're going to run through. You're looking at ACA market protections leading to more stability. How do you stabilize the ACA? Do you increase the regulation back to what it was before 2017? And one that was NAIFA worked on was short-term policies. And so I think there'll be an effort to sort of reevaluate whether those short-term policies are and should be viable options for individuals. Take a look at the next slide, please. So if you shift and you have that trifecta again, this is where you're going to add in things like a public option and perhaps even expansion of Medicaid, and of course additional regulation would be possible if you had that trifecta. The next slide. So if you're looking at some of the potential actions here, you're going to look at an expanded enrollment period. I think in either case scenario, you're going to have that discussion. We're going to expand some of the outreach programs. Although if you look at, there was a CMS report recently that was talking about the enrollment into the marketplace, and agents were clearly listed as one of the top enrollers in outreach. And so I think even, and we saw this shift right after the ACA was enacted, having conversations with CMS, that there was an increased appreciation for the role that the advisors played in working with consumers. So even though you're looking at expanded outreach programs, I think there's going to be a valued conversation for our members. You're going to see a reinstatement of cost sharing reduction payments and perhaps expanded subsidies to eliminate some of that gap coverage. And I really don't see that it changes much, even if you have the Democrats pick up the seats, again, because the numbers are so narrow that you're going to address the other issues that are on the list. Let's look at the next slide. So in the insurance regulation side of things, as I mentioned before, you're going to see a reduction in the short-term plan maximum from 3 years. That may come down. I think that's going to be discussed regardless of the outcome. The creation of a federal public option, that's likely if they pick up the Democrats, that is, pick up the seats in Georgia. What you're not going to see is in either. You're not going to have the numbers for a single payer system. The campaign ads were always funny, that there was the threat of taking the 26-year-old off the family plan, and the reality is that's not going to happen under either scenario. You may see an expansion of the list of essential health benefits that are required, and maintaining the cost protection for pre-existing conditions. Again, that was more rhetoric. It's going to stay under either scenario. We're not going to say the pre-existing condition requirements. Let's look at the next slide. Medical billing is something, I think it's a matter of figuring out where you can get the House and the Senate proposals to actually line up. It's been something that has been talked about a good bit in the 116th Congress, and it's just getting the momentum and the timing to get that passed. And I think under either scenario, it's something that we're going to be looking at. Hit the next slide. So if we look at the House committee rosters, as I said, we were watching closely some of the different committees because they have jurisdiction over our issues. That's what we do. So let's take a look. Let's run through the next slide. On the House Ed and Labor Committee, you can see that Donna Shalala lost her seat. We had a couple of retirements, is what the strike-throughs mean. So we're going to see a handful of new people come on to the House Education and Labor Committee, and so we're going to need to talk to them. They're going to look at things like worker classification. So if you followed what was going on in California with the requiring everyone to be labeled as an employee versus an independent contractor, that's something that would fall into this committee. So that's why we kind of watched that one, as well as some of the fiduciary issue as shared jurisdiction. Let's flip to the next slide. Energy and commerce, that's primarily health. No real upsets there, but we do have some retirements. Let's go to the next committee. As financial services, Ben McAdams in Utah is still that outstanding race that I mentioned that we were still watching. And again, you see some retirements, or in the case of Denver Riggleman on the Republican side, he lost his primary. So we'll see some new people on the Financial Services Committee too. Let's go to the next slide. Ways and Means, couple of retirements on the Republican side. Tom Suozzi is in a really tight race, and in New York, it still hasn't been called. They're looking at counting some of the mail-in votes and think that he may pick it up, but right now he's running behind his Republican challenger. So we'll could see a seat there change as well. Go to the next one. So in the Senate, we'll take a look, same thing. Look at the next slide. On Senate banking, Martha McSally lost her seat. Doug Jones lost his. So there are going to be 2 new people there. David Perdue's race is still pending. And as we talked about earlier, when we were looking at sort of the chairman on the banking committee, Corrado, will likely go to finance, making Pat Toomey the chairman on banking. Next slide. In the Senate Finance Committee, same thing. You're going to see a change in chairmanship. Chuck Grassley will go on to chair the Judiciary Committee. You'll see Mike Crapo become the chair of the Finance Committee. So we have a couple of other retirements on the Finance Committee on the Republican side. So they'll have new people that come in to the committee there. And so we'll work with them to bring them up to speed on our issues. Let's look at the next slide. The Health Committee, same thing. Doug Jones lost his race, so we'll see a new Democrat put on the committee. If Kelly Loeffler wins the Georgia race, she would stay. If she loses, we'll have a seat there. And then again, we have some retirements. So new people coming into all of our committees that need to be aware of our issues and what it is that we do for the industry. So special committee on aging, no change in the leadership there. It's going to be the same, but we did see 2 individuals lose their seats, so we'll have more people come in. Aging looks at any long-term care insurance issues that we have. And so it's a special committee. They basically make recommendations, but it's an opportunity for them to sort of champion our issues and then bring it about, which usually tends to fall into Senate Finance, but it's important as far as creating awareness. And then the next one. So let's talk specifically about New Jersey. New Jersey, no upsets. Y'all were pretty consistent. All of the incumbents won. You can go through the list and see anybody that you put up, whether it was Republican or Democrat, it pretty much stayed where it was. Everyone was reelected. Let's look at the next slide, which will continue the rest of the races in New Jersey. No changes, so it's all good stuff, but it means that we need to talk to these individuals. We want to watch closely if any of them change committees. If you see any additional people that are brought on to our committees of jurisdiction, we're going to work a little more closely with them than what we usually do. But we want to make sure that we're solidifying those relationships. Let's go to the next slide. So how are we going to deal with this new Congress? What are we going to do with them now that they're in place? Well, we're going to have to start building relationships with them. And the way that we do that is debt retirement is one. After you run this campaign, it's very costly. NAIFA has a very strong PAC, so we have the ability to go in and look at people that are coming into the new Congress and say, you know what, we're going to help you with debt retirement, and we want to sit down and talk to you, figure out what your background is with our industry, explain what it is that we do, and start developing a relationship that way. We also will schedule lobbying meetings, both with our professional lobbyists, we'll do meet and greets, and we can go and make sure that we know who these people are. But more importantly, it's you. We're going to go to our membership. Now, as I said, the New Jersey delegation stayed the same. We really don't have any new members, but you certainly have members that maybe you weren't involved with before that you need to go out and meet. And you may know close proximity to other states. Do you know people in New York? Do you know people in New Jersey, new members of Congress? Did you go to college with someone who moved out of state and has now suddenly been elected to Congress? If so, let us know. Report that relationship. It don't necessarily have to be a constituent. It's always best if you're a constituent, if we put you down as that individual who has that relationship, but it doesn't have to be. Let's look at the next slide. So this gets to New Jersey specific. And what I'd like New Jersey to do is get social. It's easy enough to do. We want to make sure that we're congratulating our new members of Congress, our re-elected members of Congress. NAIFA will certainly be doing that on an association-wide enterprise level. We'll be working to make sure that we talk to these members, welcome them back to Congress, make sure that they know we're here to work with them. We'll send them paperwork, we'll send them letters. So that's what you can do too. You can go to Twitter, and I would suggest that you include a picture of yourself. If it's a member of Congress that you've actually worked with, if you've had a picture taken of the two of you, post that, congratulate them on their re-election. Make sure that you tag NAIFA, make sure that you're tagging that new member of Congress or that member of Congress. Throw a hashtag about what we do. If you don't have a picture of you and a member of Congress, it's interesting to have a picture. It draws more people in. Do something New Jersey specific. You know, do the Taylor ham, the pork roll and cheese, whatever it is that makes New Jersey, New Jersey. Put that in, and that'll draw that members of Congress attention. You can also send them a letter. It can be an electronic letter. It doesn't have to be a piece of paper because that'll get radiated and become a mess. But send an a letter, offer to be a resource. Make sure that they're seeing that you're supporting them. The relationships that you build, I can't overstate this, will be crucial to our advocacy efforts. And so we really need you. It'll be a benefit to you. It'll be a benefit to your clients. But we really want to make sure that we're reporting all of our relationships. If you have a relationship with an existing lawmaker, let us know. Just send an email to naifa.org/advocacy. You can go to a website and put it in. You can email us at advocacy@naifa.org. We'll also just allow you to send us an email and tell us who you know. And that allows us to pull together a pool of resources. And these existing lawmakers, you may say, you know, Diane, I've been working with my lawmaker for years. They know who we are. They know what we do. They appreciate and they're supportive of us. Why do I need to engage? Because lawmakers talk to other lawmakers. And so what you want to do is make sure that if your member understands our industry and is supportive, that they're willing to talk to other members and make sure that they understand. Or maybe you can say, I know you understand our industry, but who in the delegation doesn't? Is there someone else that I should be talking to? And anyway, that adds to the overall enthusiasm. So we have a plan going forward. I'm going to wrap up on that time. Thank you again for including me in your meeting. I hope that you will choose to become active. If you don't know your member, but you're willing to establish a relationship, let us know that too. We'll facilitate that meeting. Hopefully we'll be meeting again soon in person, and we can put you guys on the hill and do what I love best, and that's having everybody at the Capitol. With that, I'd like to again say thank you. Have a great day and remain active. Bye-bye.